The sky burned in hues of molten copper and ash as Captain Elias Marin knelt on the war-torn soil of Zaro's prime, his matte black armor scorched and dented from hours of retreat and bloodshed. Around him, the battlefield smoldered with the breath of recent fire. Rubble still pulsed red with heat, and the air choked with the acidic scent of scorched flora and seared flesh. Despite it all, Elias's gaze was not on the hellscape that surrounded him. His focus, unwavering and fierce, rested on the three small creatures trembling before him. They were cubs, Zarketh cubs, no taller than his knee, cloaked in obsidian scales that shimmered with an oily sheen under the dying sun. Their eyes, molten gold and wide with fear, blinked up at him not with the instinctive malice their kind was infamous for, but with something else. Trust. Fragile, unlikely, yet unmistakable trust. He reached a gloved hand forward slowly, palm up, showing he carried no weapon. One of the cubs, smaller than the others, sniffed the air, then took a tentative step forward. Its tiny claws scraped the stone, and it let out a low, crooning sound that Elias would have once considered predators' call. But here it was the mew of a child, lost and afraid. Behind him, the rest of the squad held formation, their eyes shifting nervously between Elias and the approaching storm of shadows in the distance. They knew what loomed out there. They all did. The Zarketh were coming. Their elders, their soldiers, their war-born, and yet none had dared move as Elias knelt, one armored sentinel facing the very creatures humanity once called extinction incarnate. Earlier that day, this scene would have been unimaginable. It had started with a summons, unexpected, coded in the language of war, but carrying the cadence of desperation. An emissary of the Zarketh had arrived at forward outpost Theta alone, unarmed and visibly wounded. The base commander had nearly ordered its shot on sight, but Elias intervened. There was something in the way it held its stance, defiant, yet weighted by something heavier than pride. They met in the central war chamber, surrounded by a dozen nervous soldiers, weapons trained and safeties off. The Zarketh emissary, towering at nearly 3 meters, removed its helm. Scars scored its face, old and new, each one a chronicle of violence. But its eyes, those same molten gold eyes, held something rarely seen in war, mourning. Elias stepped forward, unarmed. "You call for a parley. What do you want?" The creature bowed low, not out of subservience, but ceremony. When it spoke, its voice rumbled like tectonic plates shifting, each word a stone dragged across steel. "We have witnessed what your kind does when no one watches, what you protect, what you grieve. We bring no arms, only hope. For our young." Whispers erupted behind Elias, confusion spreading like wildfire. The Zarketh, apex predators of the Outer Rim, requesting protection for their children from humans, who only years prior had narrowly survived extinction-level encounters with them. The emissary lowered its body to the floor and outstretched its claws. 3 small figures emerged from beneath its cloak, their scales still soft with youth. They clustered together, wide-eyed and trembling. "These," it said, "are the last of our seed, the cradle of renewal. We trust them to you." Elias remembered how the room fell into stunned silence. Some soldiers swore. Others reached for their weapons. The base commander looked ready to detain the emissary for psychological breakdown. But Elias, he knelt just as he did now. Something deep within him stirred, a memory, half buried beneath years of battle cries and the stink of burning cities. The memory of his daughter, gone before the war ever reached her home. She had eyes like theirs, eyes that saw beauty in places others feared. He reached out, and the smallest of the cubs mirrored the motion. That was all it took. "I'll take them," Elias said, standing, personally. The commander's face turned to stone. "You're not authorized. This could be a trap. They're monsters." "No," Elias replied quietly. "They're children, And so the journey began. Elias took only a small squad, 5 soldiers who either believed in him enough to follow or feared him enough to obey. They moved quickly under the cover of the planet's jagged ridges and toxic weather patterns. Following coordinates burned into a stone tablet the emissary had left behind. A sanctuary, it claimed, a place where the Zarketh once laid their dead to rest, hidden from enemy and kin alike. Their path was treacherous. Acidic fog rolled in at night, corroding metal and skin alike. The winds howled with the force of ion bursts, tearing apart communications and forcing them into silence. They had to move in formation, step by step, never leaving anyone behind. Not even the cubs, who had to be carried during the worst of it. Private Risa Tanik had been the last to agree to the mission. Her record spoke of valor, her demeanor of loss. She rarely spoke, but Elias knew what haunted her. She watched the Zarketh butcher her outpost 3 years ago. Her brother had died in her arms. Now, she found herself cradling one of their offspring to her chest as it shivered from the cold. "Do you think this means anything?" she asked one night, voice barely above a whisper. "What we're doing?" Elias didn't answer at first. Instead, he stared into the flickering campfire, watching the cubs sleep huddled together beside a broken energy shield. "I think," he said slowly, "it's the only thing that ever has." By the 3rd day, the terrain grew more unstable. The ground cracked and spat sulfur. Shadows danced unnaturally between boulders. It was then that they heard the thunder of footfalls behind them. The Zarketh, not their enemies. Not this time. Their presence felt like an earthquake in Elias's chest. Not because of fear, but because they were following, not hunting. Watching, protecting. And though no words passed between them, he understood. The emissary's hope had not been a bluff. These creatures had risked everything on a gamble that humanity of all species could offer sanctuary to their future. But not all humans had agreed. Satellite drones caught glimpses of their movement. Word spread. Mercenary companies, outlaw syndicates, even rogue military divisions. Each sought a piece of the legacy the Zarketh cubs represented. Power, influence, genetic weapons. Everyone wanted them for something. When the first skirmish broke out, it was sudden and without warning. A sniper's shot cracked through the dusk. One of Elias's squad dropped instantly. The camp erupted in chaos. Bullets tore through the air, and the cubs screamed in voices so heartbreakingly close to human, it made Elias's blood run cold. He dragged them behind cover, shielding them with his own body as Risa returned fire, her face twisted in rage. It wasn't long before they repelled the attackers, leaving behind a broken unit of bounty hunters armed with stolen tech and greed in their eyes. They'd lost a man. But more than that, they'd lost time. That night, Elias sat beside the smallest cub, whose scales were flecked with blood. Not its own, but from the soldier who had died saving it. He reached out slowly, resting a hand on the cub's back. It nuzzled into his side, letting out a soft, wounded cry. "We're not monsters," Elias whispered. "Not if we can do this. Not if we can keep you safe." The creature blinked up at him, and for the first time, Elias saw something unmistakably familiar in its gaze. Hope. As dawn broke over the charred horizon, Elias stood, watching the rising light catch on the distant cliffs. The path ahead, uncertain but necessary. They were hunted. They were outnumbered. And yet they would continue, because now he understood. These weren't just cubs. They weren't symbols or weapons or tokens of diplomacy. They were second chance. And for once, Elias Marin believed that maybe, just maybe, humanity deserved one too. The silence that followed the ambush was not peace. It was a kind of silence that stalked the aftermath of violence. Unnatural, heavy, and cold. Elias stood among the bodies of their attackers, his rifle still smoking, hands trembling not from exertion, but from restraint. He had counted 17 in total, each one equipped like they had known exactly what they were walking into. Precision weapons, disruptor rounds, tranquilizer darts meant for biological capture, not elimination. That told him everything. These weren't random scavengers or desperate marauders. They were sent with orders. As Risa finished checking perimeter, she walked back toward Elias with a look he'd seen before, grief carefully stitched beneath duty. She glanced toward the cubs, now huddled inside a makeshift cocoon made from heat blankets and armor plates. They knew our route. We've got a leak. Or eyes in orbit. He nodded. I figured as much. What now? We keep moving. She didn't argue. They were past that. Each member of the team had long since internalized the risks. But it was more than risk now. It was inevitability. They weren't just carrying young Zarketh anymore. They were bearing the weight of a decision that echoed across species, across wars, across hatred handed down through generations. Every step forward was a challenge to that history, and that made them targets. They buried the fallen soldier at the base of a blackened tree, twisted by centuries of acidic rain. Elias pressed his hand to the soil, not speaking a word. They didn't have time for prayers, and words had lost their comfort long ago. He rose, brushing soot from his knee as the smallest cub came up behind him. It nuzzled against his leg, eyes soft and wet with something far too human. He looked down. We'll make it. The cub chirped quietly, and Elias wasn't sure if it believed him or just needed to. They moved again before the sun could rise fully. What passed for daylight on Zaro's prime. A dull, sickly glow filtered through a permanent haze of dust and chemical mist. The path twisted through old mining tunnels, remnants from the early human colonization attempts decades ago. Now they lay abandoned, carved deep into the mountains like forgotten scars. Private Kellen took point, scanning with thermal as they descended into the darkness. No movement. Readings are clean. Risa stayed close to the cubs, her weapon never lowered, eyes flicking between shadows. Elias kept to the rear, eyes on their backs, listening for anything that didn't belong. The deeper they went, the colder the air became. Not from temperature, but absence. Absence of light, absence of safety, absence of the outside world. It was here, in the bowels of the world, that Elias found himself alone with his thoughts, with the faces of the dead, with the question that continued to press against his mind. Why had the Zarketh chosen him? They had more to fear from humanity than trust. Yet that trust had been given. Freely, desperately. Elias had fought them once, years ago, during the siege of Cryan V. He had watched them tear through bunkers like tissue, had buried his comrades in craters still steaming from plasma strikes. And yet, even then, he remembered seeing one of them drag its wounded away rather than continue the slaughter. As if somewhere beneath the armor and talons and primal rage, there was something else, something more. The cubs had begun to grow quieter now. The smallest one, whom Risa had half-jokingly started calling ash for the color of its scales, never left Elias's side. The others were growing bolder, sniffing the tunnels, their curiosity rekindled after days of silence and hiding. It was a small thing, but Elias noted it with care. Even in the dark, life reached toward the light. Hours passed without incident. Kellen confirmed they were within a day's travel of the sanctuary coordinates. But something was wrong. The deeper they went, the more the walls began to whisper, not with sound, but with presence. Elias could feel it in his bones, the air pressing against him like the weight of a storm just beyond the horizon. Then the tremors began. The first was minor, almost dismissible, a shiver in the walls, a few pebbles trickling from the ceiling. But the second hit harder. Dust burst from cracks. Metal supports groaned. The tunnel shifted beneath their feet. Cave-in risk, Kellen muttered. We should reroute. Before he could finish, the world lurched violently. A roar echoed to mine, deep, mechanical, and wrong. The sound of something not built to last shifting under its own dead weight. Move! Elias barked. They ran. Stone exploded behind them, crushed under tons of collapsing rock and steel. One of the cubs cried out as the tremor threw it to the ground. Elias turned back instantly, grabbing it by the scruff and cradling it in his arms as he sprinted. Dust swallowed them, thick as smoke, blinding and suffocating. But still they ran. They broke into a secondary tunnel, narrower but intact. Kellen slammed the emergency seal as debris thundered into the space behind them. When the silence finally returned, it felt heavier than ever. No one spoke for a long moment. Then Reese's voice cut through. That wasn't natural. Elias didn't need to agree. He already knew. He looked down at the cub in his arms. It had buried its face against his chest, shaking. He crouched slowly, setting it down as gently as he could. You all right? It looked up at him, something in its gaze that wasn't just fear, but understanding. They knew, Risa said. The mercs. They weren't sent to kill us. They were sent to slow us, so someone else could catch up. Kellen nodded grimly. The bounty's growing. Words getting out. How long until they find this tunnel? Elias stood. Not long. They pressed forward. The tunnels gave way to natural caverns, vaulted spaces veined with bioluminescent moss and long-dead mining equipment. Here, finally, they paused. Kellen activated a perimeter shield. Risa double-checked the motion sensors. The cubs huddled together near the glowing wall, quiet but alert. Elias leaned against a support column, letting his eyes close for a moment. His muscles ached, his lungs burned, but he couldn't rest. Not yet. Risa joined him. They trust you. They don't have a choice. That's not true, she said. They chose you, just like we did. He looked at her, surprised, but she didn't flinch. You could have walked away, she continued, but you didn't. You saw them for what they were. Not threats, not tools. Children. That matters, even if we don't live long enough for it to. Elias swallowed hard. We'll get them there. Risa's expression darkened. What if it's not enough? What if all we're doing is buying them a few more days? Then it's still worth it. He meant it. Every step, every wound, every lost comrade. It was all worth it. Because for the first time since the war began, Elias felt like he was fighting for something instead of against everything. And that difference mattered. The night passed slowly. Sleep came in fragments, stolen moments between sensor checks and distant echoes. But the next morning brought a sliver of light through the upper cracks in the cavern ceiling. And with it, a new sound. Voices. Not human. The Zarketh. Elias moved toward the edge of the cavern. Beyond the shadows, figures approached. Tall, armored, silent, but they did not attack. They did not even speak. They waited. Elias stepped forward slowly. Ash followed at his side, chest puffed out slightly. A tiny guardian. One of the Zarketh stepped closer and unfastened its helmet. Beneath it was not the monstrous visage humanity had been taught to fear, but a face scarred with age, marked by sorrow. A female, elder by the look of her. She knelt, not to Elias, but to Ash. The cub stepped forward hesitant, then touched its snout to hers. A breath passed between them, a bond ancient and sacred. Elias understood. They had arrived, but the journey was not over. Not yet. The moment of recognition between Ash and the elder Zarketh echoed through the cavern like an unspoken pact, witnessed not by cheers or ceremony, but by silence, profound and binding. Elias stood still, unsure whether to breathe or bow, not out of fear but reverence. It was not every day one stood on the edge of history, cradling the fragile pulse of a future that had almost never been. The elder rose slowly, never once looking at Elias directly. Instead, her eyes swept across the cubs, who now emerged from behind armor plating and field packs, approaching the adult Zarketh as though drawn by an invisible tether. The moment was pure, untouched by politics, unspoiled by war. For a fraction of a second, Elias let himself hope. Then the others arrived. The new figures were human, not from his unit, not from any military branch he recognized. Sleek exosuits, reflective visors, weapons tuned for precision and silence. There was no call for surrender, no offered terms, just a mechanical click of safeties disengaging. Drop your weapons. The voice came from above, filtered through a helmet's modulator. Elias turned to find 3 more figures perched on the edge of the cavern's lip, rifles aimed with clinical detachment. "We're not here for you," the voice continued. "Step aside, and no one dies." Kellen and Risa took position instinctively, rifles raised, eyes scanning for weak points. The Zarketh remained motionless, not out of ignorance, but because they understood the stakes. Their stillness was not cowardice. It was calculation. Elias raised his hand slightly, signaling to his squad to wait. "You're from Sigma Black, aren't you?" The lead merc didn't deny it. Sigma Black was a ghost outfit, officially disbanded after the Tri-System Accords. Unofficially, they did the kind of work that governments wanted to pretend didn't exist. Biological procurement, advanced threat neutralization, weaponized diplomacy. "This isn't your fight," Elias said carefully. "These cubs are under protection, per interspecies asylum code." The code was vetoed this morning. The merc cut in, executive override. The Zarketh Young are now classified as strategic bioassets. Kellen muttered a curse under his breath. Risa's jaw clenched, her finger twitching against the trigger. "You don't want this fight," Elias warned. "Not here, not with them watching." The elder Zarketh stepped forward finally, her presence silenced even the hum of powered armor. She said nothing, but the merc instinctively backed a step. That was enough. "No," Elias said. "You want to treat them like commodities? You'll have to go through us." The merc sighed. "Then die with them." It happened all at once. The first shot cracked through the cavern, hitting Kellen square in the shoulder. He spun but didn't fall, ducking behind a pillar as Risa opened fire. Elias grabbed Ash and pushed him behind a rock formation before turning his rifle toward the approaching mercs. The firefight was unlike anything Elias had ever experienced. Tight corridors, bioluminescent glare casting distorted shadows, the echo of weapons fire deafening. Dust rose in waves, obscuring targets, painting the air in grit and desperation. 2 of the mercs went down quickly, their hubris blinding them to the sheer determination of those defending the cubs. But their tech was superior, and they moved with brutal efficiency. Risa shouted for cover as another barrage hit too close. A piece of shrapnel sliced across her cheek, blood trailing down her collarbone like a crimson tear. Elias focused his shots on movement, not heat. The suits absorbed temperature too well, but they couldn't silence the sound of footsteps, the flicker of hesitation. Then something changed. The elder Zarketh let out a low, guttural growl, not rage, but invocation. Her body shifted, muscle and scale flexing beneath ancient armor. With a blur of motion, she launched into the fray. The air screamed as claws met metal. The cavern became a maelstrom of tooth and steel. One merc screamed as he was lifted into the air, his limbs flailing, armor cracking like dry bone. The elder didn't kill quickly. She wanted them to see, to feel. Risa dropped to a knee beside Elias, reloading. "We're not going to hold them, even with her." "We don't need to hold them," he said, eyes searching for something. "We need to make it out." "How?" Elias didn't answer. Instead, He looked toward Ash, now crouched near the other cubs, eyes wide, body tense. The elder turned toward her, as if hearing something no one else could. The cavern pulsed once, then again. Then Elias saw it. There, beneath the rock ledge where the elder had first appeared, an ancient doorway, half buried by debris and erosion, symbols pulsing faintly with dormant power. A sanctuary, not just in code, but in truth. He ran. Kellen covered him. Fire and control bursts, one hand pressing against his bleeding arm. Elias reached the door, brushing aside moss and stone. His glove activated the dormant panel, and the ground rumbled in response. The doorway hissed open, revealing a corridor lit by soft, golden light. He turned and shouted, "Risa, Kellen, this way! Get the cubs!" Risa didn't wait. She grabbed two of the cubs, motioned to the others, and darted toward Elias. Kellen followed, staggering but determined. The elder Zarketh backed slowly into the corridor, holding the rear guard, her eyes never leaving the now retreating mercs. Whatever they saw in her, it was enough to make them fall back. The moment they were all through, Elias hit the seal. The door closed with finality that promised safety, or something close enough to it. Silence returned. The corridor was vast, carved from obsidian and bone, etched with glowing glyphs that moved like language and song. The air was warm, filled with the scent of petrichor and distant storms. The cubs wandered, noses twitching, eyes wide with wonder. For the first time in days, they didn't look afraid. Kellen sat against the wall, clutching his arm. Risa tore open a med pack, working quickly to stop the bleeding. Elias stood over them, breathing heavily, his hands shaking not from fear, but from the sheer, overwhelming weight of survival. The elder stepped forward. She reached for Ash, drawing a long, curving line across his brow with one talon. A blessing, a mark. Then, for the first time, she spoke, not in guttural growls, but in rough, deliberate Terran. "You have honored the trust." Elias stared, unsure if he had imagined it. "What is this place?" "Sanctum," she said. "Oh, beyond memory. Safe." Risa looked around, her voice hushed. "How long can hold?" The elder didn't answer. Instead, she walked deeper into the corridor, the cubs following her like a procession of stars behind a dying sun. Elias exhaled. They were safe, for now, but nothing had ended. The mercs wouldn't stop. The override meant governments were shifting, alliances breaking. The cubs represented more than bloodlines. They were leverage, future, threat, and hope. He sat down beside Kellen, whose painkillers were just starting to kick in. "We'll rest," Elias said, "just for a moment." Risa didn't reply. She stood at the edge of the corridor, watching the elder and cubs disappear into the glow. Her hand never left her rifle. Even apex predators knew to trust the right human. Now, humanity had to prove it was worthy of that trust. The sanctuary's silence was deceptive. Beneath the surface calm, tension thrummed like a taut wire, vibrating with the knowledge that the outside world had shifted irrevocably. Even in its ancient stillness, the corridor hummed with latent energy, as if the place itself anticipated what was coming next. Elias hadn't slept. None of them had. Not really. Risa sat cross-legged near the far alcove, tuning her rifle with the precision of a surgeon, while Kellen slept fitfully, a thin sheen of sweat glistening on his brow despite the cooling meds. The cubs had huddled near the glowing glyphs, finally lulled into a semblance of peace. Ash remained beside the elder, silent and alert, like a sentinel born from myth. The elder watched them all. She had not spoken again, but her presence remained heavy, an anchor tethering them to something older and deeper than any war or treaty. Her eyes glinted in the amber light, unreadable yet unyielding. Elias wondered if she grieved. For the cubs, for the lost ones, for a world that would never be safe again. When the sound finally came, it was so soft it might have been mist, a shift of air, the barest rustle. Elias stood, motioning silently. Risa reacted instantly, weapon raised, eyes scanning the shadows. Kellen groaned as he pulled himself up, blood soaking through the fresh dressing. From the far end of the corridor, light spilled in, a cool, artificial blue. Not sanctuary light, not natural. A probe. Elias swore under his breath. "They found us," Risa said, low and grim. The elder growled, not in fear, but warning. She stepped between the humans and the cubs, muscles coiled, ready. Ash mirrored her, his small frame shaking yet firm. "We can't stay," Elias whispered. "They'll breach." "Where?" Risa asked, glancing toward the dark beyond the corridor. Elias looked to the elder. "Is there another way?" A beat passed. Then she turned without a word and began walking deeper into the sanctum, the cubs following without hesitation. Elias exchanged a glance with Risa and Kellen before trailing behind. Whatever lay ahead had to be better than waiting to die in a tomb. The tunnel narrowed, its walls closing like a throat swallowing them whole. The light changed, warmer, redder, pulsing with a heartbeat rhythm. Carvings lined the walls, depicting Zarketh in various forms. Warriors, scholars, nurturers. Not monsters. Beings with purpose and history. Elias ran his hand over the etched stone, and a flicker of sorrow coursed through him. What had humanity stolen in its fear? The corridor opened again, this time into a chamber vast and circular, like the inside of a planet. A dome stretched high above, open to the stars, the air crisp and wild. Beneath their feet, the ground was not stone, but woven roots and vines that pulsed with bioluminescence. At the center, a platform rose from the earth, surrounded by ancient constructs, part organic, part machine. The elder moved to one and placed her hand against its surface. Symbols flared to life. "She's activating something," Kellen said, clutching his side. Elias stepped closer. "Escape?" Risa shook her head. "Too structured. Looks like a beacon." The elder turned, eyes fixed on Elias. "They will come. Ours. If message sent." Kellen blinked. "Wait. There are more." "Scattered," the elder said, her voice like gravel across old wood. "Hidden, but they listen." Elias nodded slowly. "Then do it. Send it." She hesitated. Risa stepped forward. "Why wait?" "Because if they come," the elder said, "it is war." Elias understood then. The message wasn't just a beacon. It was a declaration. A rallying cry to the remnants of a species humanity had nearly extinguished, and it would change everything. He looked back toward the corridor, where the soft hum of approaching drones echoed. "We're already in a war," he said, "but now we have a chance to choose the kind of people we want to be." The elder studied him, then placed her palm flat against the console. A tone sounded, low, resonant, final. Far above, in the open dome, a light burst into the sky like a silent flare, vanishing into the stars. Elias didn't know if anyone would answer, but they had called. That was enough. The seconds stretched thin. Risa tightened her grip on her rifle. "We need to move." Kellen nodded. Pain etched into every movement. "There's no cover here. We can't hold this room." "No," Elias said, his voice steady. "But we don't have to." A tremor shook the floor, subtle but deliberate. From the vines beneath their feet, something stirred, roots shifting, mechanisms unlocking. A section of the chamber floor split, revealing a tunnel that spiraled downward, lit with soft gold. The elder motioned. "Go." "I hold." Elias shook his head. "No one gets left." "I hold," she repeated, louder. "Protect young." Ash stepped toward her, trembling. The elder bent, pressing her forehead to his. Something passed between them, something sacred and old. Then she rose, turned to face the corridor, claws bared, eyes blazing. Elias grabbed Ash's hand and led the cubs to the tunnel. Risa and Kellen followed, helping the slower ones descend. The last thing Elias saw before the tunnel door sealed was the elder standing tall, unyielding, as the first shimmer of intruders entered the sanctum. The descent was quiet. No one spoke. Each footstep echoed with the knowledge that sacrifice had bought them one more moment, one more breath. The tunnel narrowed, became rougher, until it emptied into a wide basin of moonlight and wind. They had emerged into a valley shielded by mountain and mist, untraceable by scan or satellite. Elias knelt beside Ash. The cub's eyes were dry, but Elias saw the pain, the silent devastation of one who had just lost a mother twice. "She gave us a future," Elias whispered. Ash didn't respond, but he leaned into Elias's side. That was enough. Risa emerged beside them, scanning the horizon. "We're not safe. Not yet." "No," Elias said, standing. "But we have a chance now." In the sky above, stars shifted, one brighter than the rest, moving against a drift. Not natural, not Terran. A response. Kellen stumbled forward. "If they're coming, we need to prepare. Not just for war, but for diplomacy. We can't make the same mistakes." Elias nodded. "We won't." He looked at the cubs, now exploring the valley with hesitant steps, trying to understand this new world. He looked at Risa and Kellen, soldiers, friends, survivors, and he looked at the stars. Trust was a fragile thing, easily broken, rarely given, but today they had earned it. And when the others arrived, whether to make peace or demand retribution, they would find humans standing not as conquerors, but as guardians. Even apex predators knew when to trust. Now it was time for the rest of the galaxy to learn why.